Hello, everybody. Welcome to Common Language. This is a series of digital events produced by Poet in the City, pairing up poets with activists and academics to unpack the type of everyday words that are used in the news cycle that we want to understand a bit better. And today's subject is Universal Basic Income, or UBI. We'll get into it later. Just to introduce myself, my name is the Repeat Beat Poet, or Peter if you do prefer. I'm a spoken word artist and hip hop poet. I'm a broadcaster as well. And for the purposes of this world of work conversation, I've also worked in hospitality for many years. I've done lots of individual creative freelance jobs. So I've had many experiences of the world of work. And today I am talking to the wonderful Bea Bannister from UBI Labs Youth. And Bea, would you like to introduce yourself? Just a quick one line.
I'm happy to. I am currently a student, but in my free time, I campaign for a universal basic income, which we're going to be discussing. And I am a member of UBI Lab Youth, as Peter said, and I also co-founded UBI Lab Women.
Wonderful. Well, yep. Looking forward to hearing and having this conversation with you, because it sounds like you're a bit of an expert. I am just a head on a stick. That's all I am. I'm here to ask the right questions. But to kind of open up the space, I'm going to begin with a poem, because as a poet, that is apparently what I do. So this piece is about work and the nature of the speed of work. And yeah, this is called Can't Stop, Won't Stop. Yes, let's go, let's get it, gotta move, gotta stack that paper, gotta make that cheddar, gotta chase that bag, gotta get that bank. Cash rules everything around me, so bow down to the pound. Don't stop, gotta hustle, gotta juggle, gotta tightrope walk, more work, less talk. And you better get yours, because I'm gonna get mine. I'll be fine when I dead off this 9 to 9. I'm going 8 days a week at the standard grind, grinding out shifts, grinding coffee for the pricks. Can I get a skinny, wet, decaf, almond double flat white with a cinnamon twist? If you insist. Don't push me, I'm close to the edge. I'm at the end of my tether, whatever the weather, whatever the method, it's all of my effort not to. I'm doing 10 toes, the grindstone never left my nose. In this city where you can't stop, can't breathe, no justice, no peace, no sobriety, no release, sleep no more, for this city hath murdered sleep. We kick back, take a load off, get licked, before bliss slips to guilt trip, a quick blip, a rip in time, and back to the grind. I gotta make it, so I can't stop, because when I am there, with my sweet hard-earned freedom filling the air, sniffing the glory of the feast I worked years to ensnare, I will sit still and I will wait for the others and the rest. Thank you. I'm gonna virtually take up all of the applause from everybody watching. I'm sure that you're, no, thank you. Yeah, so just by way of opening up the kind of conversation, what I wanted to do with that piece is to talk about like how ubiquitous work has become in our lives, where there's no sense that work is something that is only from 9 to 5. We all become very much beholden to our employers and beholden to all of our work. And it doesn't always sit very well right with me. So maybe Bea, could you just bring in the concept of UBI and then explain a bit about that to anybody who doesn't know universal basic income?
Of course. So for anyone who's not aware, a universal basic income is a proposed payment that is made regularly. So we can talk about the possible amounts per week to everyone, regardless of their income, their status. There's generally a different amount for children versus adults, but that's pretty much the only distinction. And the crucial thing about this payment is that it goes to everyone. And that might sound at first, people have a lot of common objections, won't that stop people working? Why are you still paying the rich? Which we can go into in time if we need to. But the point is that it redefines what work is in a way that I think is very relevant to the poem that you just read. So yeah, proposals, just to give you kind of a rough idea, they usually range from saying between 50 to 150 pounds a week for adults and say 30 to 80 pounds a week for children. And that's money that there's no condition as to what people have to spend it on. That's just money that they get that doesn't replace the current welfare system. It might lead to a kind of rebuilding of the welfare system, but it doesn't replace it. And that is money that means that people have the freedom to, say, work less. As you know, looking at that poem, as we're probably going to discuss, work has become, as you say, so ubiquitous, and so it seems to pervade every single aspect of life. And so universal basic income is really a way of redefining that and allowing people a freedom that they don't currently have.
Wonderful, thank you. I know that when I first heard the idea of UBI, it did take me, I did have to get past the sort of idea of, oh, it's just free money? Is it just like, secured income? And it's really interesting that even before I kind of knew about UBI and the different types of other guaranteed income schemes, because UBI is one of a couple of different ways of providing guaranteed income for people. Even before I'd actually learned about the issue, I was kind of picking holes in it. I was like, oh, this won't work and that won't work and this won't work. Meanwhile, the situation and the conditions of most workers across the world, even in what you call the developed world, where these sorts of schemes are being trialed. So for instance, in I think Finland, a couple of the other Scandinavian countries, New Zealand as well, even in these places, conditions for the vast majority of workers are really actively bad, and yet we still feel an affinity to the old ways of working. B, what do you think about kind of the role of UBI in helping us transition to a new way of working? Obviously, with the context of the coronavirus pandemic, people have been reassessing the world of work. So how does UBI fit into this?
I think it's crucial in my image of a transition, because I think, as you said, the coronavirus pandemic has totally, it's basically flipped the world on its head to some extent, and things that we took for granted and things that, as you say, we accepted as being the way they were, have totally changed. This idea that people are going to work in an office for 5 days a week, suddenly people are working at home, and even though that might seem like a sort of small transition, and perhaps one that's not that relevant in terms of kind of working habits, I think actually it was really big, because I think just any change which enables us to see a potentially different world, and I think COVID obviously has led to a massive vision and an experiencing of a different world, is really important. And I think that led to proposals for a universal basic income becoming not only more frequent because we needed to change something because this can continue, but also more accepted because all of a sudden the world's changed so much that it's obvious that we do need a new solution. And I think that a universal basic income basically says, I think we've had this really dangerous assumption that's grown up more and more in recent years, that work is the thing as paid labour, if that makes sense, and that things can only be work if they're paid for. And I really dislike that conception. I think that's where a UBI comes in.
See, I hadn't even kind of deeped the amount of unpaid labour which something like UBI would be able to pay people for. What we think of as unpaid labour, what is unpaid labour? For instance, take the care sector and caring in general. How if we paid people for the time that it takes to raise children, to be carers fully, it would really upend who we see as valuable and which workers we see as valuable. I know with UBI women specifically, the types of unpaid labor that we expect mothers, wives, female relatives to do is astronomical. Imagine if people were paid for that work. It would remove the reliance upon employers. It would remove the reliance upon well, the levers of money and power, which men have been almost exclusively in control of. Yeah.
Precisely. I think one of the major breakthrough moments for me with the universal basic income was when I understood also that it's simply about having a choice. So there were suggestions that women could either choose, therefore, if they wanted to be caregivers, and then also men would have that choice as well. So it's kind of about a general equality, or they could pay other people to do that work for them out of their universal basic income, which was money that they perhaps didn't have before for childcare or for caring for relatives, which could previously have been quite oppressive. And I think for me, it was just that moment when I realized that, okay, a universal basic income doesn't mean we have to give up everything as it currently is. If some people want to stay, if women want to stay looking after their children, then that's absolutely fine. But it's about providing a choice, which I think is the most important thing going forward. Because at the moment, I don't know, but the future for me seems quite narrow and quite restricted. And I think a universal basic income offers so much more variety.
I do agree. I agree about variety and choice. Obviously, the pandemic, the classic example is the types of jobs where you did have the choice to work from home or not. If the managerial class, if sort of line managers and that level of people within a standard office structure, if they can give the choice to their workers of how they would actually like to work, studies have shown, many studies have shown, that actually increases productivity as long as there is trust there. And 9 times out of 10, people assume that if you have a guaranteed income, people will actually work less. That's proven not to be true in the sorts of trials that have gone on. People actually tend to be more productive in the work that they want to do because they lean towards meaningful work. And I think that UBI really can, or at least guaranteed income schemes, they do a good job of providing a baseline sort of security net. If you think about it as an addendum, as an add-on to the benefits and the social security system, it allows people to not be beholden to whatever work they can get, much of which is underpaid. It is we don't have to talk about the climate disaster, but a lot of it is part of this massive set of overproduction that we have as the basis of our economy. And I think moving away from not meaningless work, but work which is actively damaging to the climate, fuels overproduction. Let's take, I don't know, the fast fashion industry, or let's take the fast food industry. Those sorts of modes of production are, in my opinion, personal opinion, I think they're of the past. We need to change the ways in which our modes of production actually happen. And it starts with changing the way we look at work. B, what are your opinions on this?
I most certainly agree. I think that actually another really interesting aspect of a UBI is the help that it will provide in that transition period, because obviously, you can have big suggestions for changing production, for moving away from fossil fuels, which is totally necessary. But we have to be aware that as we move away from fossil fuels, that does come at a cost of thousands of jobs that are currently quite low paid often, that people really rely on. And I think that the really important thing is that actually a universal basic income would guarantee, if you provide those people who are in those jobs that we need to get rid of for the sake of the climate with a guaranteed income for long enough that they could then look for jobs elsewhere, and to enable that transition to just be slightly less difficult, and for people to have a safety net as we move away. I think that that's really important, because otherwise I think that moving into this new future, as necessary as it is also really scary for a lot of people, understandably, because it comes at the cost of their livelihood. But a UBI helps change that to some extent.
And similarly, when we're talking about giving people the options of how to work, with the oncoming climate disaster, which is quickly spooling out, and it's no longer something which we in the Anglophone West can pretend is happening just to other people in the underdeveloped countries, the countries that have been underdeveloped by the West. it's fascinating to see that the jobs that we need to help transition away from the old extractive colonial economy, those jobs that we need are things that can be done like with UBI as a basis. So things like, you know, retraining people, upskilling people, moving people who were maybe working in the petrochemical industry to working in clean energy industries. There's a strong space, in my opinion, for UBI, like you were saying, to help with that transition, because there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people across the world who are going to need to be who are going to need jobs. They're going to need clean jobs, and they're going to need ways in which to live if there aren't the same amount of jobs and the same type of jobs. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think that's totally true. You know, we have to be able to change it. I think even just in a general point, something that UBI is so amazing for is just this idea that what you choose, or at least I know for me, because I'm still a student and I haven't yet kind of entered into this quite daunting world of work properly, this idea that what you choose also doesn't have to be permanent in a way that it currently feels as though it has to be, that there is this opportunity for retraining, that you know you'll have a security net, a safety net that is good enough that you can change your mind and you can retrain in the context, as you were just discussing, of the climate emergency. You know, people can move from industries and from jobs that are damaging to the environment, and they can retrain and they are able to retrain, which I think is really, really important.
One of my favorite examples of a sort of analogous thing is where in the 50s and 60s in America, after the Second World War, you had guaranteed federal jobs where people would be employed by the state, you know, and a lot of it was ecological repair work. So it was being a park ranger, it was taking care of animals and wildlife, it was just straight up planting seeds. If we just employed people to plant seeds and like to change the way, basically, I think, and I'm really on my soapbox with this one. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes I keep my opinions down. Now this time I'm like, no, then comrades come rally. Anyway, no, I think that the type of ecological knowledge that we need to foster within population as a whole to help people understand the vastness of the climate breakdown and how it affects everything, like the economy and work. I think the type of jobs we need are things where people are actually out in nature, where people aren't in offices, where people aren't being traditionally industrious or productive. It's things like gardening, it's things like being in nature and interacting with nature. And I think that if you're not worried as a base fundamental level in the back of your mind about where your next paycheck is coming from, where your next meal is coming from, we talk about food poverty, fuel poverty, the different types of exposure to like vast inequality that people have. Things like UBI, things like guaranteed incomes can do so much to free people conceptually as well, mentally, from being beholden to the old ways. And that's why personally I'm all for UBI as part of a general rethinking of the way in which work works for people, because currently people are wage like, you know, wage laborers, where you have an hourly wage and you're very beholden to your boss. I want, as part of a wider sense of worker emancipation and people's emancipation, the public, I want there to be something like UBI where you can take that to your employer and you can be like, here's this scheme, and if this job doesn't give me what I need, then I'm out, yo.
I think, yeah, most certainly. And I think also, you know, talking about kind of getting people into nature so that they can see the impacts of the climate emergency. UBI also offers massive possibilities for people volunteering more, because if people find that actually they only feel they need to work a 4-day week because they have this extra bit of money, or even if it's not as dramatic as losing a whole day of work a week, but if it's, you know, they're working slightly shorter hours and then they gain those hours and they are able to go and volunteer in local schemes, and, you know, in in nature and they can see the real effects happening. I think that's really, really important. And again, it just comes back into that sense of redefining what work is and realizing that work doesn't have to be paid for, or it doesn't have to be, as you say, kind of industrious or at an office desk. And also, just to add on to something else you were saying, I think also this idea of like food poverty, and that this is a problem that's only going to increase with climate change and with the climate disaster that we're facing. But I read some statistic the other day, which is something like 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency bill, you know. So if we're having more and more climate issues, if we're having more droughts, floods, earthquakes, whatever, people are really gonna suffer because we just simply don't have the money, enough spare money to deal with it. So a UBI is really important in that sense as well, just for providing immediate support.
Where else, just as a wide question, what other types of problems do you think that UBI could help with?
I think it's incredibly wide-ranging, which I know sounds like a sort of cop-out, but actually it's just the truth. But I think some of the most interesting ones I've read, well, I'll give you an example of one of the ones where I would least have thought about it before I read about it, but it was this idea of, so people who are in prison, and with helping them move, like reintegrate into society afterwards, because there was a suggestion that basic income whilst they were in prison, so that when they came out, they were provided with an amount of money that had been kind of saved up for them, which would help them reintegrate in society. And then also just the idea that if you're leaving prison, and this ties in more generally, but you know, if you have that safety net of money, it becomes much easier to move back into society, and also perhaps not to turn back to crime. Just in general, crime rates have been lower in all of the pilots because, well, in most of the pilots, because people don't, I guess it's as simple as that one of the biggest motivators for crime is a lack of money or poverty. And so if people have a safety net underneath them, then actually crime rates drop quite significantly.
So yeah, once again, I wasn't, you know, I hadn't thought about the effect of UBI on incarcerated people, but obviously with the percentages of people that are incarcerated increasing, sort of like, you know, not arbitrarily, but essentially what I'm saying is, as we see like the prison industrial complex keep on speeding up and ramping up, if only to talk about the US and the UK, it's actually an incredibly expensive thing to do to imprison people because of things like you were saying, reoffending rates. It costs more money to have somebody in prison for a year than to send them to most private schools, for instance. It's actually cheaper to educate and support people. And, you know, if UBI is one way to do that, great, fantastic. I think that what we're sort of talking around in many ways is that there needs to be some like deep radical transformations in the world in many aspects. But crucial to each of them is giving individuals a sense of stability and a sense of security, which I think our current mode of like neoliberal late stage capitalism doesn't want people to have. It wants people to be quite close to poverty or quite close to homelessness or quite close to being destitute, so that you'll take the bad job. You won't, unionize or collectively organize, use collective bargaining power to change things. And what a tool UBI would be for people to agitate for better living and working conditions, and for governments to be able to say, we have an option here which can deal with massive societal issues. Yeah.
No, precisely. I totally agree. I think you've really hit on something there which really matters to me with the basic income as well, which is this sort of horribly individual mentality that I see even amongst my friends, where people are not inclined to collaborate, or it's not even, being generous in the standard terms, but it's this idea that people are doing what they have to do to survive, and that they just want to look after themselves and get through this. And I think Or it kind of hurts me to see it, but I don't blame anyone for it. I think that that's a product of the system, as you mentioned, but I think that a UBI would really change that, because once people have a safety net, as we've sort of said, they're able to prioritize other things, which currently I don't think anyone can blame people for prioritizing money. I don't hold anything against my friends or even myself for thinking, when I think about the future, that I want to make sure that I am financially secure. I think that's a really natural human thing, but I wish that it wasn't, because I think that it's having, I don't wish it wasn't the natural human instinct, but I wish that we weren't having to prioritize money so much, because I think that it's taking away from really important other areas of life.
I agree. I think money in the modern world, so like, for instance, since like the 80s and the kind of era of greed is good neoliberalism that like really popped off in America and under Reagan and Thatcher, and then obviously it's still the same economic system that we're under currently. I think that that type of awareness of like the financialization of everything can be put into a financial system and can be evaluated on a monetary sense. I think that that's something which is very unnatural in actual, like the full history of world history, and then obviously so across the world, both basically in space and time, our attitudes to like hyper-capitalism, how everything can be valued, it's uncommon, and I think it's something that we need to move away from. I think about the phrase human resources. I think about the phrase natural resources. We call these things resources as opposed to like the earth and people and like land. And to generalize a bit, I think that because young people, millennials, zillennials, Gen Z, whatever, if you're born after 1980, I'm counting you in this. I think that younger people have, they're less invested, literally monetarily, they have less access to money and to wealth and to value and property and things like this now. And I think that because young people are disenfranchised in general, especially in the UK, you talk about student debt, you talk about how unlikely we are to be on that property ladder or to be integrated with the old ways of the economy. I just think that as people are less and less likely to like actually be invested in the old economic system, I think that people are looking harder and harder now for new ways of working, new ways of ascribing value to things. I think money is useful when we are using it to actually assign value to things. If money gets divorced from actual value, as in like, currency gets divorced from value, then you can have hyperinflation, you can have the type of banking sector where multiple millions of pounds are being made and lost on, transactions that take a fraction of a second to make. And all of this stuff removes workers from the means of production, the value of their production and what they're doing. So yes, that was a long rant about the proximity to workers of the means of production since the 80s. But yeah, thank you. B, do you have anything to come back on?
No, I totally agree with that. I think that for me, a universal basic income is in part just about getting people, well, it's about lots of things, but about bringing people back closer and re-establishing what money is for. And I think actually, on a slightly different note, but Andrew Yang on his presidential campaign, like when he was running to be president, he used to ask people, if you had an extra $1,000 a month, what would you do? And I think it's an incredibly effective question, because it makes you realize that this is actually a tangible amount of money that's being proposed that you could do something with, and that could affect your life in some way. And I think that that's really important in a world where we perhaps feel so, as you said, sort of distanced from even understanding what money exactly is or how money is being spent on us by the state. I think in terms of all of that, it's actually really important that people are able to think about this personal level and to bring it back to them and to give them some sense of control over it.
But what you mentioned about Andrew Yang and his types of policy proposals were really interesting, because it made me think again about kind of what we deem valuable enough to spend a lot of money on, like as societies, as nation states. If we decided that instead of investing in the knock-on effect, essentially, of the petrochemical industry, the old economy, extraction, domination, ruling, if we moved that budget into something like UBI or into social security or into, for want of a better phrase, from each, basically you give people what they need to live lives independently, and actually helps people live collectively, and collectively is how you see bigger and better changes. I think that the idea of doing Andrew Yang's idea of putting UBI forward in that way, of being like £1,000 a month, what would you do with it? Everybody can have access to this. I think it helped people conceptualize just how big of a change it can be, like how big of a sea change it could be. And this is why I bring in the military as well. If we moved away from militarism, if we moved away from having poverty as a standard, it would be through a natural transition through something like UBI. I hope so, I believe. I'm going to read a short poem now. So this piece is, I wrote it after a mate of mine left his job at a bank, and he was quite sad. And so I thought I would give him some advice. So this piece is called Advising a Worker Contemplating Self-Immolation After Being Let Go. Rearrange your room. Trust me, it helps. I've got nothing better to offer you. I'm giving you my greatest gift, safe in a puzzle box behind these instructions. Caress an ice cube, press it to your head, wash your wools and t-shirt separately. Take the time to stop and care. Life will feel fuller. Pain repeating itself fades in a healthy host. Walk back to the bank, explode on the counter, fight back like the oil-spitting pan erupting. Bark and scrawl, bite and brawl, send them packing, humbled. Your noble crusades and vengeful wars could burn us all alive, though. Remember, pure rage is not sustainable. Sleep it off. Then rearrange your room. Trust me, it helps. Thank you. Yes. Ah, glorious, glorious, glorious. So I'll take this opportunity to say, B, absolutely wonderful to be speaking with you, repping UBI Youth Labs and UBI Women's Lab. Say a special thank you to Poet in the City as well. Thank you to Oliver Cable and the whole crew. My name has been Peter, the Repeat Beat Poet. And yeah, I advise you to go and look up Universal Basic Income and yeah, learn more about it, and we can hopefully make the world a better place for the world. No, make the world a better place for us, for people, for human beings. Thank you for watching, everyone.